30 AD. No showers, no toilet paper. Life in the time of Jesus. Have you ever wondered what personal hygiene was like in the time of Jesus? Without running water, without toilet paper. Could you manage the daily rituals of cleanliness in ancient Judea? As the amber glow of oil lamps flickers against rough limestone walls, imagine waking before dawn in a simple stone house. The air is still cool from the night, carrying the faint scent of olive oil and smoke from last evening's cooking fire. Outside, roosters announce the coming day as you reach for a small clay pitcher beside your sleeping mat. This precious water will be your only washing for the morning. This was the reality of life in 30 AD, the time when Jesus of Nazareth walked the dusty paths of Galilee and Judea. No morning showers to refresh the body, no soft paper products for the most basic human needs. Just the persistent challenge of maintaining dignity and ritual purity in a world where water was scarce and every drop was carried, conserved, and considered precious. How did the common people of Jesus' time manage these most intimate aspects of daily life? What solutions did they devise for problems we solve today with the simple turn of a faucet or the tearing of paper? And perhaps most intriguingly, how might understanding these mundane realities transform our reading of familiar gospel stories, revealing layers of meaning that remain hidden to our modern sensibilities? As we journey through the physical realities of first-century Palestine, we'll discover something surprising, a connection between bodily care and spiritual life that runs far deeper than we might imagine. And we'll uncover the mysterious significance behind one of Jesus' most puzzling criticisms of the Pharisees, a rebuke that makes little sense until we understand what cleanliness truly meant in a world without showers or toilet paper. Subscribe, because Jesus is returning and wants you closer to him. Understanding the physical world he inhabited deepens our connection to his teachings and reminds us that our faith is grounded not in abstract concepts, but in the flesh and blood reality of human existence. Join us as we walk these ancient paths, experiencing the tactile truths that shaped the way Jesus and his contemporaries understood purity, community, and the sacred rhythm of daily life. To comprehend life in 30 AD, we must first understand the broader historical context that shaped every aspect of daily existence. The land of Israel in the first century existed under the shadow of Roman occupation, a reality that influenced everything from taxation to travel, from religious practice to personal privacy. The Emperor Augustus had established the Pax Romana, a time of relative stability, but at great cost to local autonomy. Herod the Great had died nearly 3 decades earlier, and now his sons ruled as client kings and tetrarchs, with Pontius Pilate serving as the Roman prefect of Judea. For ordinary Jewish families, this meant navigating a complex social landscape. At the top of society stood the Roman officials and wealthy landowners, followed by the religious aristocracy centered around the temple in Jerusalem. Below them were merchants, artisans, and tradespeople like carpenters, Jesus' own profession. Most people, however, were agricultural laborers, either working their small family plots or serving as day laborers on larger estates. At the bottom were the impoverished, the disabled, and slaves. Within this stratified society, the daily struggle for existence was paramount. Most families lived at or near subsistence level, with little surplus for luxuries or conveniences. The Mediterranean climate, with its hot, dry summers and mild, rainy winters, dictated the rhythm of life. During the dry season, water conservation became essential. Every household task, from cooking to cleaning to personal hygiene, had to be accomplished with minimal water usage. Housing reflected these economic realities. In villages like Nazareth, where Jesus grew up, homes were typically small structures of stone and mud brick with dirt or stone floors. These modest dwellings, often no more than 400 square feet, housed extended families. Privacy, as we understand it today, was virtually non-existent. Family members shared sleeping quarters, usually simple mats on the floor that were rolled up during the day to create living space. At night, even animals might be brought inside for security. These homes lacked what we would consider essential infrastructure. There was no plumbing, no drainage system, and certainly no dedicated bathrooms. A simple courtyard often served multiple purposes: cooking space, work area, and a place where personal needs might be attended to away from the main living quarters. For more private bodily functions, people typically went outside the village to designated areas or used chamber pots that would be emptied in the morning. The infrastructure of larger towns and cities offered somewhat improved conditions. Archaeological excavations in Jerusalem have revealed sophisticated water management systems, including cisterns, aqueducts, and ritual baths called mikvahot. These systems, however, served primarily public and religious functions rather than private households. Even in Jerusalem, most ordinary people still carried water from public fountains or wells to their homes in clay or leather containers, a labor-intensive daily chore typically performed by women and children. This scarcity shaped not only practical realities, but cultural attitudes. Water was precious, used judiciously, and often collected from seasonal rainfall in cisterns for the dry months ahead. The value placed on water explains why hospitality customs emphasized offering water to wash a guest's feet, a practical necessity after traveling dusty roads in open sandals, but also a profound symbol of welcome and honor.
Good morning.
Religious practice was inseparable from daily life. The Jewish understanding of cleanliness encompassed both physical hygiene and ritual purity, concepts that were intertwined but distinct. The Torah contained detailed regulations about purification, and by the 1st century, these had been elaborated upon by religious authorities.
Thank you.
Ritual impurity wasn't considered sinful. It was a normal part of life's cycle, but it did temporarily restrict participation in certain religious activities. For women, monthly menstruation and childbirth required specific purification rituals and periods of separation. For men, emissions of bodily fluids required purification. For everyone, contact with dead bodies, even something as simple as touching a small dead animal, rendered one ritually impure. These purity laws weren't merely religious abstractions. They shaped the most intimate aspects of daily existence, including how and when people cleaned themselves. The economic realities of Roman taxation further stressed an already precarious existence. Under Roman rule, taxes could claim between 30 to 40% of a family's production. This crushing burden meant that most families had little left for anything beyond the essentials. Specialized items like fine textiles, imported spices, or cosmetic products were luxuries beyond the reach of common people. Instead, they relied on locally available natural materials for every need, including personal hygiene. This world of scarcity, physically demanding labor, and close communal living forms the backdrop against which we must understand the daily realities of bodily care. It was a world Jesus himself inhabited fully, experiencing its limitations, participating in its cultural practices, and transforming many of its ordinary elements into profound spiritual teachings. In the absence of modern conveniences, how did people in Jesus' time manage the most basic aspects of personal hygiene? The daily reality was far removed from our experience of turning taps and flushing toilets. Instead, it involved careful planning, community solutions, and natural materials. Morning routines began with minimal washing, usually just the face and hands. A small pitcher and basin would be the only equipment available, and the water itself was a precious resource carried from the nearest well or spring, often at considerable distance and effort. This explains why the Mishnah, the collection of Jewish oral traditions compiled later but reflecting earlier practices, specified the minimum amounts of water required for various washing rituals, quantities that seem remarkably small to modern sensibilities. For more complete bodily cleansing, public facilities existed in larger towns. Archaeological excavations have revealed bathhouses built in the Greco-Roman style, particularly in more Hellenized cities. However, these were primarily used by the wealthy or those heavily influenced by Greek and Roman customs. For most ordinary Jewish people, regular immersion would have been in mikvaot, ritual baths designed specifically for purification rather than cleaning. It's a common misconception that people in ancient times simply didn't bathe. The reality was more nuanced. While daily showers were indeed non-existent, regular cleaning was valued both for practical and religious reasons. The difference was in frequency and method. A full-body washing might occur weekly rather than daily, often in preparation for Shabbat. This cleaning would use minimal water, perhaps 2 or 3 liters, applied with a cloth, with special attention to visible areas like the face, neck, and hands. During summer months, streams, lakes, or the Sea of Galilee provided opportunities for more complete washing, though always with consideration for modesty. Historical records suggest that bathing in natural bodies of water would be done while partially clothed or in designated areas separated by gender. The Jordan River, which features prominently in gospel accounts, served both practical and ritual functions, a place where physical cleansing and spiritual purification could occur simultaneously. As for toilet facilities, the archaeological record reveals several approaches depending on location and social status. In rural villages like Nazareth, the solution was typically simple. Designated areas outside the settlement served as communal latrines. Within homes, clay or stone pots functioned as chamber pots, especially for nighttime use or for the elderly and infirm. These would be emptied each morning into designated pits, away from living areas and water sources. In more developed urban settings like Jerusalem, archaeological excavations have uncovered more sophisticated sanitation. Some wealthier homes had stone toilet seats positioned over cesspits. Public latrines existed in larger Roman-influenced cities, typically featuring stone benches with holes positioned over a channel with flowing water, an early form of sewage system. These facilities were communal, with people sitting side by side without dividers, making the experience far more public than modern sensibilities would accept. The absence of toilet paper, a relatively recent invention in human history, required alternative solutions. The most common materials were natural: stones, ceramic pieces, leaves, moss, and scraps of cloth. The left hand was typically used for cleaning after defecation, which is why the right hand was exclusively used for eating and social interaction, a custom that persists in many parts of the world today. After using the left hand for cleaning, washing with water was essential. Explaining the Jewish practice of netilat yadayim, ritual hand washing, before meals and after using the latrine. Evidence from the Qumran community, contemporaries of Jesus, who left extensive records about purity practices, indicates that they required members to relieve themselves at least 2 zerozozeren cubits, roughly 3 zerozondren feet, from their settlement, and to bury their waste afterward. This practice reflected the instruction in Deuteronomy 23:12-14, which commanded the Israelites to designate places outside the camp for defecation and to carry a digging implement to cover their excrement. For women, menstruation presented additional challenges in a world without disposable products. Cloth rags, wool, or plant fibers were commonly used and would be washed and reused. During this time, women were considered nida, ritually impure, and after the completion of their period, immersion in a mikveh was required before resuming certain activities, particularly marital relations. Dental hygiene, though not as systematic as modern practices, wasn't ignored. People used twigs with frayed ends, particularly from aromatic trees like cinnamon, as primitive toothbrushes. Abrasive materials like crushed eggshell or salt might serve as cleaning agents. Mint, anise, and other herbs were chewed for breath freshening, plants that Jesus mentioned in his teachings about tithing. These physical realities shaped not just bodily comfort, but social interactions. Body odor, would have been a common element of human interaction in a way unfamiliar to us today. Yet historical accounts suggest that strong smells were mitigated through the use of oils, particularly olive oil infused with herbs or spices. These oils served multiple purposes, moisturizing the skin in the dry climate, masking odors, and even providing a barrier against insects and sun exposure. Jesus and his disciples, as itinerant preachers, would have faced these hygiene challenges with the additional complication of travel. The Gospel accounts mention them crossing the Sea of Galilee, walking between villages, and journeying to Jerusalem, all without the benefit of regular access to home facilities.
Good morning, sister.
This explains the significance of hospitality customs like foot washing, which addressed an immediate physical need created by travel conditions. When Jesus washed his disciples' feet at the Last Supper, he was transforming a necessary hygienic practice into a profound lesson about service and humility. The physical labor that dominated daily life, walking long distances, manual work in carpentry or fishing, agricultural tasks, meant that bodies were regularly soiled and fatigued in ways less common in modern sedentary lifestyles. This reality underscores the relief and refreshment offered by even simple washing facilities, and helps explain why physical cleansing became such a powerful metaphor for spiritual renewal in religious teaching. The everyday practices of bodily care in first-century Palestine were shaped not only by practical limitations, but by cultural norms and religious beliefs. Jewish cultural practices regarding cleanliness were influenced by biblical commands developed over centuries and reflected a worldview that saw little separation between physical and spiritual realities. The concept of tahara, ritual purity, guided many aspects of daily life. Unlike modern notions of hygiene, which focus primarily on germ prevention, ritual purity concerned one's fitness to participate in religious activities, particularly those connected to the temple. Various conditions, contact with corpses, certain bodily discharges, childbirth, and skin diseases, rendered one temporarily impure, requiring specific purification rituals before rejoining certain communal activities. These purification practices explain the proliferation of mikvaot, ritual baths, throughout ancient Israel. Archaeologists have discovered over 150 of these installations in Jerusalem alone, dating to the 1st century. These stepped pools contained enough water for full immersion and were fed by natural sources like rainwater or springs, as living water was required for valid purification. Immersion in the mikveh wasn't merely symbolic, but required complete contact of water with every part of the body. No barriers like dirt, jewelry, or tangled hair were permitted. Family roles were clearly defined in this society, with women bearing primary responsibility for household water management. The daily task of drawing water from wells or springs fell predominantly to women and girls, as evidenced in biblical narratives like Jesus' encounter with the Samaritan woman at the well. This gender-specific labor meant that women were intimately connected with the resource that enabled cleanliness, giving them significant influence over household hygiene practices despite their limited public authority. For men, certain occupations carried specific purity challenges. Shepherds, for instance, lived in close contact with animals and often far from community facilities, making regular ritual purification difficult. Tanners, who worked with animal hides using urine and other strong-smelling substances in the curing process, typically lived and worked outside city walls because of the odors associated with their trade. Fishermen, like several of Jesus' disciples, contended with the smells of their catch and the challenges of working with nets and fish oils that clung to clothing and skin. The preparation for Sabbath included specific attention to bodily cleanliness. By Friday afternoon, families would ensure that water was heated and preparations made for pre-Sabbath washing. The Talmud, though compiled later, reflects earlier traditions when it suggests that Sabbath preparation included washing the face, hands, and feet in warm water and changing into clean garments. This practice connected physical refreshment with spiritual preparation, treating bodily care as part of honoring the sacred day. Community standards enforced certain hygiene expectations. The close quarters of village life meant that extreme neglect of personal cleanliness would impact neighbors and draw social sanction. Historical records suggest that even the poorest attempted to maintain basic standards, particularly for visible areas of the body and clothing. Communal bathing facilities in larger towns provided social spaces where relationships were maintained alongside bodily cleanliness. Clothing care presented its own challenges in maintaining cleanliness. The common people typically owned only 2 sets of clothes, daily wear and Sabbath attire. Garments were made of wool or linen, never mixed, following biblical prohibition, and washing them required significant labor. Clothes would be soaked in large stone basins, treated with alkaline substances like soapwood or ash lye, then beaten against rocks and laid out to dry in the sun. This labor-intensive process meant that clothes were washed infrequently by modern standards. Hair care followed cultural patterns that signified ethnic and religious identity. Jewish men typically wore beards, considering them a mark of masculine dignity. Hair was generally worn longer than in modern Western styles, but shorter than the very long hair associated with Nazirite vows. Oil was applied to both hair and beard for conditioning in the dry climate. Women's hair was usually kept covered in public, but privately would be cared for with oils and combs made of bone or wood. Community norms balanced privacy with practicality. While bodily functions were recognized as natural necessities, modesty remained important. Historical sources suggest that people sought locations away from public view, used garments strategically for covering, and developed euphemistic language when referring to private bodily needs. This sensibility is reflected in biblical texts that use indirect phrases like covering one's feet to describe using the toilet. The distinctions between Jewish and Gentile hygiene practices created cultural boundaries that feature prominently in New Testament accounts. Jewish concerns about ritual purity led to wariness about Gentile facilities like public bathhouses, which were associated not only with different cleanliness standards, but with pagan practices, immodesty, and morally questionable activities. These cultural differences formed part of the tension visible in early Christian debates about Jewish-Gentile relations. For Jewish families, certain materials were avoided for reasons beyond mere practicality. Items derived from pigs, for example, would never be used for personal care due to religious prohibitions. Instead, plant-based materials and products from ritually clean animals provided alternatives. Olive oil served as the foundation for most body care, often infused with locally available herbs for fragrance and medicinal properties. The cycle of impurity and purification created a rhythm in daily life that reinforced religious consciousness. Rather than seeing bodily functions as merely biological, this worldview integrated physical existence into a sacred framework. Purification rituals served as regular reminders of one's covenant relationship and the ideal of holiness that extended to all aspects of life, including the most mundane bodily realities. Understanding these cultural practices transforms our reading of many gospel passages. When Jesus addressed issues of purity and cleanliness, he was entering a conversation with deep cultural significance that went far beyond mere hygiene. His teachings didn't dismiss bodily care, but reframed its meaning within a broader understanding of what truly constitutes defilement and purification. When we read the Gospels through the lens of first-century hygiene practices, familiar passages take on richer meaning. Jesus' teachings about purity weren't abstract theological concepts, but addressed the concrete daily realities his listeners navigated. Understanding the physical context allows us to grasp the revolutionary nature of his message. Consider the controversy recorded in Mark 7, where Jesus is criticized because his disciples eat with unclean hands. To modern readers, this might seem like a simple matter of hygiene, but it actually concerned the ritual hand-washing, netilat yadayim, performed not primarily for cleanliness, but for ceremonial purity. Jesus' response, "What comes out of a person is what defiles them," directly challenged prevailing understandings about the relationship between physical and spiritual purity. This teaching would have been particularly striking in a society where physical cleanliness was difficult to maintain. Jesus wasn't dismissing the importance of washing, but redirecting attention to the heart's condition. For people who spent considerable effort on the limited water and resources available for bodily cleanliness, his message provided a new perspective. Inner purity takes precedence, though it doesn't negate the value of physical care. The Lord's Prayer gains new significance when we understand the physical realities of daily bread in a world of scarcity. When Jesus taught his followers to pray for daily bread, he acknowledged the precarious nature of subsistence living, where even basic necessities like food and water for washing were not guaranteed. The prayer reflects a worldview where each day's provisions, including water for drinking, cooking, and cleaning, were received as divine gifts rather than taken for granted. Jesus' frequent use of water imagery resonates differently when we recognize its preciousness in ancient Palestine. When he offered the Samaritan woman living water, or proclaimed himself the source of water that would permanently quench thirst, these weren't merely poetic metaphors. To listeners who spent significant daily effort securing water for basic needs, the promise of never thirsting again would have extraordinary appeal, both practically and spiritually. The practice of foot washing, depicted most powerfully at the Last Supper, takes on deeper meaning against the backdrop of first-century hygiene challenges. Feet, exposed in sandals to dusty roads often contaminated with animal waste and other impurities, required regular cleaning. The washing of a guest's feet was both practical necessity and honored custom. When Jesus assumed this task, normally performed by the lowest servant, he transformed a common hygiene practice into a profound lesson about leadership and service. The concept of cleanliness is next to godliness, though not found verbatim in Scripture, reflects the Jewish integration of physical and spiritual purity. Jesus didn't reject this connection, but redefined it. In Matthew 23, 25, 26, he critiques religious leaders who clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence. The metaphor would resonate strongly with people who regularly clean their limited supply of dishes with precious water. Jesus isn't suggesting they abandon physical cleaning, but is using this everyday practice to illustrate a spiritual principle. Healing narratives in the Gospels often involve bodily cleansing. When Jesus healed the man with leprosy, a term covering various skin conditions that rendered one ritually impure, he addressed not just physical suffering but social exclusion. The command to go show yourself to the priest referenced the purification rituals required before someone with a skin disease could rejoin community life. Jesus worked within the existing purity system while demonstrating power that transcended it. The resurrection narratives include interesting details about burial practices that reflect first-century approaches to bodily care. The careful wrapping of Jesus' body with spices and aloes by Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus, and the women bringing additional spices after the Sabbath, demonstrate the respect shown to the body even in death. These practices addressed practical concerns about decomposition odors, but also expressed cultural values about honoring the physical body, values consistent with Jewish belief in bodily resurrection. Jesus' teachings about priorities are illuminated by understanding resource scarcity. When Mary uses expensive perfume to anoint Jesus' feet in John 12, Judas objects that it could have been sold and the money given to the poor. In a society where basic hygiene supplies were limited for most people, this extravagant act would indeed appear wasteful. Jesus' defense of Mary doesn't dismiss concern for the poor, but establishes a hierarchy of devotion that transcends mere practicality. Perhaps most significantly, baptism, the central initiation rite of Christianity, builds upon Jewish purification practices while transforming their meaning. Immersion in water, familiar from mikveh use, became in Christian practice a one-time symbol of spiritual cleansing and new identity rather than a repeated ritual purification. This adaptation demonstrates how early Christianity retained the physical elements of Jewish practice while reinterpreting their significance in light of Jesus' life and teachings. These reinterpretations reveal Jesus as neither rejecting nor simply accepting the bodily care practices of his time, but rather using them as starting points for deeper spiritual truths. He acknowledged the realities of physical life, including the challenges of maintaining cleanliness without modern conveniences, while consistently pointing toward the heart conditions that ultimately matter more than external purity alone. Earlier, we mentioned a mysterious criticism Jesus leveled against the Pharisees, one that makes little sense without understanding first-century hygiene practices. The time has come to unveil this connection. In Luke 11:37-41, a Pharisee is surprised that Jesus doesn't perform the ritual washing before eating. Jesus responds with a striking rebuke, saying, "Now then, you Pharisees clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside you are full of greed and wickedness." This critique becomes clearer when we understand the scarcity of washing resources in first-century Palestine. The elaborate hand-washing rituals developed by religious authorities required significant water, a precious commodity that poor families struggled to obtain even for basic needs. By prioritizing these ceremonial washings over addressing injustice, religious leaders were effectively placing ritual burdens on people already struggling with physical necessities. Jesus wasn't rejecting cleanliness itself, but challenging a system where external purification took precedence over compassion and justice. His criticism points to a profound truth. True cleanliness begins from within and manifests in how we treat others, particularly those with limited access to resources, whether water for washing or food for sustenance. This understanding illuminates Jesus' seemingly harsh words in Matthew 23:25-26. "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence. Blind Pharisee! First clean the inside of the cup and dish, and then the outside also will be clean." The cup and dish weren't random metaphors, but daily objects that required precious water for cleaning. Jesus used this familiar reality to illustrate how religious practice had become disconnected from its purpose. Just as a truly clean dish must be clean inside and out, genuine spiritual purity must begin with internal transformation rather than external performance. This insight transforms our understanding of Jesus' ministry. He lived in the same challenging physical conditions as his contemporaries, managing bodily needs without running water or modern conveniences. Yet he consistently redirected attention from external cleanliness to the heart's condition. Not because physical cleanliness didn't matter, but because he recognized how easily external rituals could become substitutes for genuine compassion and justice. To conclude, reflect on what we've discovered about life in the time of Jesus. A world without showers or toilet paper, where maintaining basic cleanliness required significant effort and resourcefulness. The physical realities of first-century Palestine weren't merely the backdrop for gospel events, but shaped how Jesus taught and how his message was understood. By recognizing the challenges of daily life in ancient Judea and Galilee, we gain fresh appreciation for Jesus' practical wisdom and compassionate approach. The absence of modern conveniences wasn't simply a hardship to be endured, but formed the context for profound spiritual lessons. When Jesus spoke of living water, his listeners understood viscerally the preciousness of what he offered. When he criticized performative purity practices, the people recognized the daily realities he addressed. His teachings didn't float above physical existence, but were deeply embedded in the tangible realities of bodies that hungered, thirsted, and required care. This historical understanding grounds our faith in the physical world rather than abstract concepts alone. Jesus entered fully into human experience, including its messiest aspects. He knew the feeling of dust on unwashed feet, the relief of water after a long journey, and the limitations imposed by scarce resources. This embodied experience informed his compassion and his teachings. For us today, this perspective offers both challenge and comfort. Challenge, because we're reminded that the gospel doesn't promise comfort or convenience, but calls us to values that transcend material conditions. Comfort, because we see that Jesus understands human needs at their most basic level and meets us in our physical reality, not despite it. Perhaps most importantly, this historical viewpoint illuminates the radical nature of incarnation. God entering not an idealized, sanitized world, but the real one, with all its bodily limitations and necessities. Jesus shared the human experience completely, navigating the same challenges of maintaining dignity and cleanliness in a world without modern conveniences. This shared reality makes his teachings not theoretical, but practical, born from the same conditions his followers faced. As we close this journey through the hygiene practices of 30 AD, consider how this knowledge might transform your reading of familiar gospel stories. Notice the references to water, washing, and purity with fresh eyes, and perhaps gain new appreciation for both the conveniences we enjoy and the spiritual wisdom that transcends physical circumstances. If you found this exploration valuable, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more historical contexts that illuminate biblical understanding. Share these insights with others who might appreciate seeing Jesus' world more clearly, and comment below with your thoughts or questions about daily life in first-century Palestine. What other aspects of Jesus' physical world would you like to explore? Thank you for joining this journey into the tangible realities that shape the gospel narrative. A story not of abstract spirituality, but of God entering fully into the human experience, including its most humble, everyday aspects.